I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need you to.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, your brother, and your friend, Rashid, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for giving me another hour of your day and another day of your time. As we wait for the honorary guest to appear, we'll talk about some issues. Hopefully, they'll appear in the booth in just a second, but we're supposed to have live from Moscow writer and journalist Eva Bartlett from RT.com. You know, it's one of the media platforms that is banned over in the West because it tells a different narrative than the narrative that the Western media puts out. And in the so-called free West, they cannot stand an alternative narrative that undermines and undercuts their propaganda and agenda for total world domination, global hegemony, war at all costs, expansionism, racism, fascism, capitalism, the disregard for human rights while using the shield of human rights, the disregard for sovereignty while talking about every nation has a right to choose, all of that. So as we wait for her to join, I just hit her up and just let her know that we are live. And there is a time difference, a major time difference going on because I think we are 9 hours behind them. So we'll give her a chance to join us in the chat and we'll just start talking about some issues until she gets here. Shout out to Anthony Ryder in the building. Cheers from Canada, Rashid. Thanks for having Eva Bartlett as a guest. No problem. I reached out to her. We talked, she accepted the invite and she should be here. As a matter of fact, she told me she was looking forward to it. William Gilchrist is in the building. Greetings, Rashid, and all from Ireland. Is that Ireland? Yeah. Shout out to Ireland too. Anthony Ryder says, let's go, let's get it. Holly, my girl Holly Horn is in the building. Holly says, salute, Rashid. Salute, Holly. Now, as we wait for her to go, come on. Let's talk about some issues that are dear to your heart, okay? Because you know sometimes the guests are late, especially if there's a time difference. And she and I, we were trying our best to map out the time differences from here to Moscow or whatever like that. And we have come to the conclusion that I believe it's a 9 hour time difference. Okay. So it's 8 my time and I think it's 5 her time. Okay. So we'll wait for her. But I want to go to something real quick. All right. Here we are right here. There's an article out on RT. And it just caught my attention because I just saw it. I'm not going to lie to you. I just saw the article tonight. Okay, she said she just hit me up. She said she'll be here in just a few minutes, okay? Everybody, she just hit me up. That was the ding ding that you heard in the background, all right? But there's an article about U.S. peace plan proposes Ukraine give up its sovereignty. Now, for the mainstream alternative media, they talk about, Ukraine must make concessions in order to remain a state. But I say that Ukraine lost its sovereignty prior to 2014. When all of the West NGOs flooded Ukraine. Because remember, Zbigniew Brzezinski, in his book, The Grand Chessboard or The Great Game or whatever, I forget which one it is, when it was talking about Eurasia, he wanted a plan to break Russia's back, to keep Russia from reemerging as a global power that is opposite of the United States. So they said to do that, they had to pry Ukraine away from Russia to break Russia's power. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union and prior to the collapse, there was a flood of what? U.S. and Western NGOs pretending as they wanted to build and invest. And what they were doing was checking the temperature of the dissatisfied within the country, as they always do, so that they can lock on to people that they can use later down the line. They can train, arm, and finance them, so later down the line, they can do what the United States has done. And the United States has used Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. So when this article comes out talking about U.S. proposes plan, U.S. peace plan proposes Ukraine give up its sovereignty, I advocate that this has taken place already. The United States is doing the negotiations with Russia. The United States is funding the Ukrainian government. The United States is transferring weapons. The United States, along with Great Britain, are giving the Ukrainian government legitimacy, even though it is illegitimate. So when you have so much influence and when your intelligence services are tied directly to the CIA, they are the understatements of the CIA and the alphabet agencies like the MI6, then you would have to be honest and say that Ukraine's sovereignty is really not an issue, because Ukraine is not a sovereign nation. They are not making sovereign decisions. They are not able to target Russia proper without US and UK and EU intelligence, or NATO, quote unquote. They're not able to do that. Years ago, I told you that the EU was the political wing of NATO. Now everybody else is starting to realize that. So when we look at this whole situation, and this article talks about the loss of sovereignty, I advocate and I propose that the sovereignty was lost long ago. And what Ukraine should be doing to try to keep some semblance of Ukraine is to back out of all of its agreements that it has with the West, not with Russia, but with the West. It is the West that has done this to Ukraine. Remember Viktor Yanukovych, the legitimate president of Ukraine, backed out of an EU deal. He said he had to wait a minute and check the temperature of the people because he did not want to do more damage to Ukraine, and he wanted to see what the Russians were offering. And what happened? The EU say this is unacceptable. What did Victoria Nuland say from the State Department? F the EU. We spent $5 billion for a regime change, okay? Well, if you spent $5 billion for a regime change, and you are changing the government at will, and you fund the government, and you control policy, and you are embedded in the intelligence services, and you're protecting the president, and you are funding the social services, how is Ukraine sovereign? How can my kids or my children be sovereign at 6, 7, and 8 years old when they're living by my rules in my house, under my governance, and under my finances? They cannot be completely sovereign. They must adhere to rules that supersede whatever they may want. So I think this is a play on words, and this is that Walt Disney reporting to try to make people believe that there's some type of realism in what America is saying. We know who is controlling America. Shout out to Nick Hall in the building. Shout out to Nick Hall in the building. Shout out to Michael N is in the building. Eva said she'll be here in just a few minutes, okay? So we got to give her a little minute. She just hit me up. Nick Hall says USA stole Ukraine's sovereignty in 2014. Not just the USA, but when I say this constantly, but the UK also. These two are one and the same. Yes, no, the UK does not have a huge military, again, but you must look at what there's an old saying is, he who controls the money calls the shots. It is the New York Stock Exchange that is tied to the London Stock Exchange. It is the U.S. Gold Exchange that is tied to the London Gold Exchange. That's why London is the largest gold trader on the planet and has no gold mines in the UK. So he who controls the money also controls policy. So this was an attack on Ukrainian sovereignty by both powers, which are one and the same. I call them the daughters of Babylon. Remember, there was a prophecy or something that said that Babylon would have two daughters come up after her. These are the two daughters of Babylon. All right. Holly Hahn says, the Western media is claiming a deal. Russia says the American side hasn't said anything. Isn't that what they always do? The tricknology. See, there's an art to American and British and Western policies. There's an art to how they present news. It's a, you know, when you are so into science, they call it biology, right? And when you're into social program, they call it when you're into socio-economic stuff, sociology, psychology, biology. Well, the U.S. and the West, they are so smitten with their exceptionalism that almost everything is propaganda. Almost everything is that. And I call it tricknology, because there's a science behind their trickery. And their science is to trick the world and to maintain dominance at every level, at every turn, at every cost. So there's a science in what they do. Everything they present to you, they present it in a way that makes them the victim and justifies what they do, and everybody else is the aggressor, even though they have bases around the world. Let me show you an example, okay? The United States will fly a bomber close to Kaliningrad, right? Or St. Petersburg, a nuclear armed bomber. And when Russia detects this bomber coming close to its airspace, and Russia sends out fighter bombers to escort this great provocation, or if China does that in the South China Sea, the United States reports that China or Russia is being aggressive, right? Because Russian and Chinese fighter pilots flew close to a nuclear-armed U.S. bomber, which the United States resides thousands of miles away. But in the media, it's presented as Russia being aggressive or China being aggressive. Now, when China or Russia flies a bomber close to a U.S. military base around the globe, or Russia flies close to its former Alaskan enclave with its bombers, Russia is being belligerent and aggressive, flying bombers and warplanes, even though they may be 30 miles, 40 miles, 50 miles away. It's an act of provocation. Two of the same thing flipped, but you get two different views on it. That is tricknology. That's to make you think that they don't tell you that Russia or China did this in response to something that the U.S. may have done that they did not publish in their papers. So it makes the aggressor the victim, and the victim the aggressor. We will not allow Iran to have nuclear weapons. All the while, the United States, Great Britain, France are saying that they're going to spend trillions to upgrade their nuclear weapons. And we already know that the United States is the only nation on earth to use nuclear weapons. Not one time, not even two times, because most people will say two times. But they use depleted uranium and the leftover stuff of the nuclear weapons in war. They coat their bullets with it. And it leaves trails of untold misery. They say some parts of Iraq is so contaminated that it'll take centuries for it to decontaminate because of all of the depleted uranium shells and bombs. But when these people in their own land fight back, they're insurgents, they're terrorists, and they're extremists. America and Britain flies warplanes, warships, and everything else from thousands of miles away, demanding that these people capitulate to Western dictates. And when they don't, they are those people are the terrorists. Those people are the aggressors, and America is fighting for freedom and justice and sovereignty around the world. It's a art to what they're doing, a science to what they sell you. It's called tricknology. That's how they trick the masses. That's how they inundate the masses of the people with propaganda. This is why people are so blind in the West, because you can tell them something, and it could be to their good, but if it's against what they think, they become belligerent towards you. Like when I was talking about the SNAP program on one of the shows, and I was giving figures about the true people on SNAP. Eva and everybody, she's in the building. We got to bring her in. Without further ado, I got to bring her in. Thank you so much for joining us today, Eva.
Hi, Rashid. I'm so sorry for my delay. I had to move my setup downstairs. My internet connectivity upstairs isn't great. I'm improvising.
I understand that. If no one else understands the internet mess it up, it's me. Could you tell the people about yourself? Because we know that what is it? Wikipedia says that they call you a conspiracy theorist about what transpired in Ukraine and what transpired in Syria. Could you clear up that? I wanted to bring that to the forefront, whether you knew it or not, that they put that in there.
No, I'm very aware. People have supporters have messaged me, and actually they've tried to alter, because in theory Wikipedia should be open to the public to edit, right? So they've tried to edit it to be at least somewhat honest and somewhat biographical, and not just a smear. And I mean, this was some years ago. I haven't looked recently, but almost immediately it was changed right back to the initial smear entry on me. So it's completely meant to discredit. And I'm not the only one by any means. A number of people who opposed the NATO narrative on Syria and then later the NATO narrative on Ukraine have just horrendous Wikipedia entries. So there is another one. It was called Everpedia. I don't know if that's still up, but they did an actually honest and biographical entry on me. So I pinned that to my X profile, and I also have a more extensive About Me page on my blog, because if people want to know a little bit more about me, I mean, it doesn't even go into depth really in my personal life, but my political journalistic life. It's a very thorough page pinned to my blog in gaza.wordpress.com. So thank you for bringing up the Wikipedia. I mean, Wikipedia, okay, it's a useful tool, like I suppose any Google or search engines, but it like Grok actually is set up to give you misinformation and to denigrate those who are actually telling the truth. I'm not saying I'm perfect or any of us that have the smear entries are perfect. I'm just saying what this is meant to do is, like all the smears that started against me since late 2016, early 2017, after Aleppo was liberated. Those smears were meant to make me look like batshit crazy. You know, don't trust that woman. Don't listen to her. And what was I saying? Was I just making things up? No, I was actually on the ground in Syria talking to people that were being propagandized about by corporate media. For example, if you recall in 2016, throughout 2016, Western legacy media was saying there were no doctors left in Aleppo. So I went to Aleppo in, I think it was July 2016. On my own, paid the taxi each way, which wasn't cheap, by the way. I couldn't take a bus. That's just the policy there. And I went to the Aleppo Medical Association, and they had over 4,000 doctors. I think it was like 45 or 600, but let's just say 4,000, among whom 800 were specialists, because along with this whole there are no more doctors in Aleppo narrative, there's no more pediatricians, there's no more specialists, and there was actually 800. So for that, I'm called crazy, bonkers, a Russian agent. I remember giving an interview to RT, who I've contributed to since, I think, 2013 when I lived in Gaza. And I said something like, and I wasn't being cocky or arrogant, but I said, if I sound like, if I write in line with the Russian media, it's because we're both telling the truth. That was in reference to what was happening in Syria. And so, and the other things was I started going to Syria in 2014. And that was a very dangerous time to go, a very unpopular time to go in terms of what many in the alternative independent media sphere were saying about Syria. Many of them were actually endorsing the so-called revolution against a brutal dictator, quote unquote, narrative. And they didn't go to Syria, period. And so I went, and actually in 2014, I was able to go to two key areas. The old city of Homs, which was a key area because it was at the time, Western media was dubbing it as the capital of the, quote, revolution. And I went there and I met people. Most of the people had left the old city due to the presence of the different terrorist factions that Western media were still dubbing, quote unquote, rebels. I have to say, quote unquote, in case people are only listening. And these terrorists, they had stolen everything from the people's homes. I met one older couple. Sorry, they weren't a couple; they were siblings, an older brother and sister, who actually stayed in their home and were not quite emaciated, but they were pretty gaunt because the terrorists had taken everything from them, and they stayed because they didn't want their house occupied or destroyed. And so going there at that time was really eye-opening because, again, Western media was having us believe this is where the big so-called revolution was occurring against the so-called dictator. And actually, there I met people, Christians, by the way, that were saying, like, this isn't a revolution. In fact, there was a Jesuit priest, Father Franz van der Loot, who was in Homs. He'd been there for, I want to say decades. My memory on that's a bit rusty, but quite a while. And when things started, he wasn't pro or anti. Well, he probably was anti by the time he was, sorry, it's actually not funny. By the time he was assassinated, I'm fairly certain he knew exactly what was going on. But certainly he said from the beginning of the events in Homs, he saw armed men carrying arms because the predominant narrative was this was a peaceful revolution, and only a couple of years, a year and a half into it, were they forced to take up arms because the quote unquote dictator. And what he said was actually, no, from the beginning they were armed. Same as in Daraa in the south of Syria, same everywhere. There were people who wanted political reforms, that is undeniable, but the very violent protests, which were from the very beginning, this was a regime change operation. And so those, I met people and they became friends who said, we went to a couple of protests in the beginning because we thought it was for actual political change. They didn't want the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad. They just wanted certain reforms, certain changes. And then they stopped going to the protests because they realized right away, oh, these are not what I signed up for. So anyway, so due to reporting and things like that, and the other key place was the ancient Aramaic speaking Christian village of Malula, which was occupied in September 2013 by al-Nusra, Free Syrian Army, and other bandits. I can't remember offhand if ISIS were there, but anyway, they're basically all the same, doing the same grotesque criminal acts against civilians and soldiers. And it was occupied for about 8 months, and then it was liberated in April 2014. So I went there in June 2014, and it was still very fresh with all the damage these terrorists had done to this beautiful historic city nestled in the hilltops. Really a stunning city and loaded with history. It's one of the only places in the world that still speaks Aramaic, and it carries on traditions they've carried on for a very, very long time, except during the time of the occupation of these terrorists. And so when I went there, I saw the destruction of the monastery and the St. Tekla convent, and the destruction of everything. If they couldn't steal it, they destroyed it. Anything to do with Christianity, they destroyed it. I saw literally icons that were machine gunned because they couldn't be destroyed any other way. Others that were burned, others that were torn with a knife, stabbed and torn, and others stolen. I mean, and this is, you would have thought that Christians in the West would speak out, and some were, but most probably just weren't aware what our governments were doing. And so back to your question in a very long-winded answer, that's why people were calling me crazy, because I was reporting that stuff and not saying, oh, this is a glorious revolution. The same terrorists that are in power now, we're doing. Al-Julani, who's been rebranded as al-Shara, he and other terrorists like him were doing these heinous acts against Syrian civilians since the very beginning. And those of us who were warning, other journalists started going to Syria, Western journalists. I must say also that Syrian journalists were doing a fantastic job. Muhammad Ali of Press TV was doing an amazing job. Ala Ibrahim, I think his name was, he was doing an amazing job. I always like to credit those. And there were many, many courageous Syrian journalists who were slaughtered by the terrorists, either in shelling, in sniping, or in deliberate traps, kidnapped and assassinated. So anyway, that's a very long-winded answer, but that's why my Wikipedia page is such. And then, of course, when the Ukraine, when the special military operation started, I'd already been to the Donbass in September 2019, so 3 years before, right? And I'd already seen what Ukrainian shelling was doing to Donbass villages and elderly, and the destruction of their homes and the terrorizing of these civilians 3 years prior. And when I wrote about that, I actually didn't even write about it for RT. I wrote about it for Mint Press News. So everything about my trip there was completely independent, including where I ended up writing my article. And then in 2022, I started going back to the Donbass because I live in Russia, and it was considerably easier for me to get there than from Canada. And so throughout 2022, I was there in some of the hardest times. I wasn't there the whole year. To be fair, I've got 2 dogs, one of whom is vying for my attention right now. So I would go for a few weeks, come back to my home, go for a few weeks, come back to my home. But I was there during heavy Ukrainian shelling of the very center of the city of Donetsk, where there's nothing military. It's completely civilian, including hospitals and schools, marketplaces. And I was also there when Ukraine fired rockets containing what are known colloquially as petal mines, these insidious tiny little mines about the size of a lighter, but shaped such that they flutter down to the ground and most of the time don't detonate until someone steps on them or puts pressure on them. And they're not generally enough to kill, although they have killed 3 civilians and maimed, oh gosh, I want to say 180, might be wrong about that, but I think it's like 185 actually, including children. So basically I was there during some of the worst. There's still ongoing war crimes, but I saw quite a bit. And again, for that, I got slandered by Canadian media, by NBC, and I'm not sure whomever else. A lot of fancy charts were made about the Russian propagandists, and I got put on those charts as well. You know, the ones to look out for. Oh, stay away from these dangerous people. But, you know, all I was ever saying was, this is what I've seen. I'm not telling you the full story. I'm saying, this is what I've seen. This is what the people are telling me, including the good. For example, the referendum in September 2022, I was there during the 5 days of that referendum, and I walked around different areas, and I obviously took transport to places like Gorlivka or Mariupol, which was very much in the media in early 2022 for the fighting against Azov Nazis, which the West whitewashed. And so the referendum was actually a very heartwarming and momentous time, because people were telling me, we've been wanting this since 2014. And then Western media spun it to say people were being forced to vote, because there were some scenes, I have no idea, there was one video that was going around showing people going up the stairs of an apartment building with a soldier holding a gun behind them. And so this was used to say, like, oh, these people are being forced. So I don't know where that video was from, but I can surmise what it actually was, because I saw soldiers standing in the area, in the vicinity, with guns. But tell me, when you vote in the States, are there security there?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Everybody I saw, they weren't like, oh my God, there's a man with a gun. They're like, okay, let's go vote. So their body language was like, because the soldiers are one of them. These are most likely Donbass security. And so, but Western media spun it as, you can't hold a referendum during a war and blah, blah, blah. Tell me how Kosovo happened. Oh, wait, there was no referendum. You know,
Right.
and these people were saying, like, we've been wanting this since 2014. And why? Well, we see Russia will protect us, for one thing. That was the overwhelming sentiment. Why else? We think that we'd have a better economy with Russia. And if you've ever gone to, for example, Crimea, you will hear that after the referendum, development started, and infrastructure that had been untouched during the duration of Ukraine's ownership of of Crimea, nothing happened. In fact, most people I met there in 2019 and then last year said Ukraine was stealing from us. Like, they didn't develop anything. Nothing was developed. And so anyway, long-winded answer to say there's many reasons that they call me crazy, but they haven't given me a fair portrayal in Wikipedia. I'm not the only one.
Why do you think that the military in Syria just disbanded and allowed for the terrorists to take over, and all of the head choppers to do what they're doing right now? And why do you think that the Western populace, not the governments, but the population in the West, buy the narrative that the West sells them?
I can answer the second part first, because Western media immediately, Shara, as he's known now, Giuliani put a suit and tie on, and Western media and Western governments lauded him as the new interim president of Syria and a bringer of freedom and democracy. And then all these influencers who'd probably never even been to Syria, certainly not during the years that these very same terrorists were shelling civilian areas, killing and maiming them, of whom I saw many during my years in Syria. And so these influencers went there and they sold like, oh, a rave on New Year's Eve. Oh, look how wonderful it is. Oh, it's so wonderful. Everybody's equal. Did those influencers go back after the slaughtering of civilians began? No, they didn't. And they're still, they're still selling it as this new modern liberal Syria. And the killings of the HTS government started almost immediately after Giuliani took power. The question about why the army stood down and how he took power, in my opinion, is still murky. I know people have theories. And one of the prime theories that many are floating is Russia signed a deal. But I've seen, first of all, no outcome of said deal. What has Russia gained? Did the war stop? Did it win in Ukraine? I mean, it's winning on the ground, but politically, has it stopped? Has it wrapped up? No. What deal? It already had the base in Syria. Some people say they say, well, they cut a deal over Ukraine. And then they say, oh, well, the deal is that they get to keep their base in Syria. I actually know Syrians who are happy that Russia remains there. If they don't remain there, who's left? Turkey, Israel, America, none of whom have the best interests of Syrians in mind. I think the most pragmatic answer is there. It is known that, I don't know the number, I don't know, generals stood down and ordered their soldiers not to fight. And it is known that, well, if we look back to 2011 and who concocted the whole bloody war, it was the NATO Gulf Turkish-Israeli alliance. And so I know people want to point fingers at Russia. My position is that when Russia saw that the army stood down, and I'm not blaming the Syrian army, lest anyone take my words out of context, I have the utmost respect for the former Syrian Arab army. I think they were heroes. However, if their commanders are telling them to stand down, and that's their orders, and they stand down, what do you expect Russia to do? So my position is not that Russia was a part of this. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I will formally apologize to whoever listens to me or watches me. I'm waiting for the full truth to come out, but my position is that Russia saw what was happening and then said, okay, there's nothing we can do. What we can do is we can save Assad, and we can bring, they've brought over between 5,000 and 10,000 Syrian civilians and ex-military, former military, I don't know the exact number of which, given them sanctity here. And during the massacres, while they didn't stop the massacre, they did at least provide shelter at the Hamaim Air Base for thousands of Syrians. It's not ideal. In an ideal world, Russia would wear a superhero cape and would go around and end all conflicts in the world. But in reality, it took a pragmatic decision. That is my opinion.
Well, Iran and Syria, before we go to the Donbass, Iran and Syria had a mutual defense agreement, and Syria had a mutual defense agreement with Russia from the Soviet days. Why was that? Why weren't those enacted to the fullest extent? Like, if someone is invading Italy, Italy will enact the Article 5 of NATO, and NATO would come to Italy's aid. Why didn't those defense pacts between Syria and Iran and Syria and the former Soviet Union, which we say Russia now, enact those to combat the terrorism and to justify more forceful fighting?
As for Iran, I really can't speak to why. I've heard, again, this is only things I've heard. I can't say it's definite or not, but I've heard that both Russia and Iran were warning Syria of the need to tighten up security. Why Iran didn't do any more, I don't know. Why they didn't enforce this pact. And Russia, I've already said what I feel about Russia. I mean, keeping in mind, when they came into Syria, they weren't fighting the war, what they call the special military operation in Ukraine. that only started in 2022. They aren't, of course, devoting all their armed forces there by any means, but nonetheless, it is the prime focus of Russia right now. So again, as I said, when they see the army stand down, what more can they do? What is the number of forces they have there, and can they take on the entirety of the combined forces of Turkey and the NATO-backed forces? Well, the Turkish-backed forces rather. So as I said, in an ideal world, that wouldn't have happened. But with everything that's happening in Donbass, and again, seeing the army stand down, I think it was just a pragmatic decision.
Do you think that Russia feels betrayed by Erdogan after pulling his behind out of the fire from the coup that the NATO had against him, and then he goes behind them and then unseats Assad? Do you believe that they are still they have some anger towards him?
I don't know. I'm not in the heads of Russian diplomats, but I think we see that Russia consistently acts in a very calm manner. We don't really see how pissed off they are or not. I mean, look how they continue dealing with Trump, in spite of the fact that he keeps breaking promises and setting up meetings and breaking meetings, and one day saying he's going to end the war and the next day calling Putin crazy and whatever else it was he said. And yet you see Russia acting with considerable restraint in regards to how they deal with this bombastic president of the U.S. So I think that if they're obviously they have no reason to trust Turkey, but they will still have diplomatic ties with the West if they can. It's just, I'm sorry, my dog. Yeah.
Well, now onto the Donbass. We see that Trump is threatening, and I think America does this purposely. They attack nations on the periphery of Russia, or some tied to Russia, or tied to China, or tied to Iran, to weaken the alliance. And now we see that Trump is coming out saying that there's a slaughter of Christians in Nigeria, and that the United States may need to go into Nigeria, even though we know Nigeria is now a BRICS partner and is a major supplier of oil to China, and also transacts oil trade in yuan now. Why didn't he scream like that when the Nazis were burning churches and taking people, forcing them out of the churches and breaking everything up in the Donbass?
In the Donbass, or when terrorists, I've already talked about Malula. Okay, Trump wasn't president in 2014. I don't remember if he's president. I don't think he was. But let's say right now in Syria, under Giuliani's rule, Christians are being persecuted. Not just Alawites, Christians, Druze, even Sunnis are being persecuted. And by that, I don't mean just like threatened. They're being slaughtered. They're being kidnapped. Their areas are being destroyed. Why doesn't he scream about them? Because it's clear, not only Trump, every U.S. government only puts these pretexts out there for whether they want to bomb or invade a country, because they're only pretexts. Venezuela, a narco state, come on. I mean, yeah, I don't have the statistics at hand. I could look it up. I'm sure you're already familiar with it, but there are, it's widely known that Venezuela is not trafficking that's not a narco state. I'd have to look for an article and cite it, but basically this pretext of trafficking or targeting narco terrorists, or whatever Trump's calling them, just by bombing their boats to smithereens, killing, how many is it now? It was over 20 a month or so ago. That's the pretext, right? But of course, that isn't the real reason. The real reason is they want the resources, and they also want Maduro gone. They don't want a strong government. That's why that was part of the thing with Syria too. They didn't want a strong government, a government that resists Israel, a government that doesn't have IMF loans, right? And Venezuela as well is a government that has been, as much as it's maligned in the media, it's been doing a lot to return control of its resources and of its country to its people, so they can benefit. I know most people in the West will say you're talking shit. It's a dictatorship, blah blah blah. I've spent time in Venezuela. I think that I don't know enough about the government to say it's perfect. I don't say any government is perfect, of course, but when I was there in 2019, the U.S. was trying to orchestrate chaos there, if you remember. They attacked the electricity grid. They created power outages around the country. And they tried to say everything's in a state of chaos. People are looting, when in fact, that wasn't the case. People were calm. They were helping one another. And at the time, if you remember, they were trying to install Juan Guaido as the new leader in Venezuela. Okay, he had some following amongst the right-wing opposition, some of whom are very violent, but the vast majority of Venezuelans wanted Maduro. They understood, and that's the other thing. They're educated. They're taught their history. They know what they're fighting for. Venezuelans. I'm talking about the working class Venezuelans, because they understand very well what Chavez was fighting for and what Maduro stands for, and what America would do if they had control or if they installed a puppet in their country. Actually, I went to a massive demonstration. It was a pro-Maduro anti-imperialist demonstration in March 2019. It went on for hours. It was very festive. People dancing. It was just an amazing scene. And then the next weekend, I went around on a motorcycle taxi around Caracas, trying to find the massive demonstrations in support for Guaido. I couldn't find them. I went around, I asked people, they told me the neighborhoods I should go to where there would be demonstrations if they were happening. In Altamira, I think, I saw a demonstration of maybe, let's say 20 people to be charitable. And then I went to other districts, and in one of the districts where there should have been an opposition demonstration, there was a Maduro demonstration marching from that district to go join the main demonstration that was also happening again that weekend. So my point is, what I saw there was a relative calm, in spite of the fact there were repeated attacks and sabotage in the electricity grid, which, if you imagine, if in the States or in Canada where I was living, if people were without power for a few hours, they start getting crazy. If they're out of power for a day or two, they go bonkers, and there would be chaos and there would be looting. So that's what they were trying to portray. And so this is back to your question. They always have a pretext. At that point, it was chaos. The country's not, Maduro can't run the country, and they did this food truck stunt from Colombia as well. It was loaded. It wasn't loaded with aid. It was loaded with metal, and I didn't see it, but I remember people reporting on it. It was absolutely not food aid. It was designed to create some sort of disturbance and create chaos. So now that you're talking about Nigeria. Now I have to say I'm not very well informed on Nigeria. It's not for any reason other than I have not invested the time, so I do apologize for that. But I know enough that when the U.S. is screaming about something, that's not the actual reason that they're going somewhere or they want to do something there. And God forbid what they might do if they actually do take action in Nigeria.
Now, as we talk about the Donbass and Russia, why? Well, we saw that Trump hosted the head chopper in the Oval Office, but we also saw that the Kremlin hosted the head chopper too. Why would Russia do that? And knowing his history, could you give us some clarity on that?
My understanding is that when Syria fell and Giuliani was installed, Russia accepted this is the new government. That's not a fact that I like. It makes me sick. It made me very sad and upset. But as I understand it, it's a pragmatism that we don't like. But we're not. Russia is dealing with the entity that is now supposed to be the Syrian government. Again, you don't have to like it. I don't. I loved Syria. I've spent a lot of time there. I'm not defending the position. I'm just saying it's a matter of fact that they're dealing with the new reality. So that entails meeting with this monster Giuliani. Although if you look at the body language of the people, the politicians, Putin and Lavrov and the others that were in the room with them, it wasn't exactly warm. It's, it wasn't like when they met with Assad. With Assad, there was a genuine warmth you could see. So that's all I can say. I don't know what's going on in their heads, but they're dealing with the new reality. I don't like it. We don't like it. I know a lot of people don't like it. I'm not defending it, but it is what it is.
Are there any rumblings about a revolution from ex-soldiers and ex-generals that are connected with Assad? Are there any rumblings about them putting up some type of revolution against the head choppers and taking power back?
It would be very difficult. I'm not being defeatist. I'm just saying realistically, Israel did strategic bombing of military positions around the time that Giuliani took over, and in many regions, Syrians in good faith laid down their weapons, and so it would, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it would be very difficult at this time to wage a sort of revolution without the necessary weapons. If you remember, as I said, the slaughtering of civilians, not only Alawites, but of civilians of all sects. Alawites were the most targeted, and Christians and Druze. But the slaughter began really very soon after Giuliani took power. But it was on the coastal areas, the slaughtering of Alawites and the abduction of women really heightened in March. And then we saw the slaughtering of Druze in the south, in the Sweda region. And so now there, unfortunately, is a real deep sectarian divide that didn't exist at this level when Assad was in power, or Hafiz Assad was in power. And I think that's another factor that will make it difficult for a Syria-wide sort of revolution to occur, because there's a lot of mistrust. And you can't really blame people for saying, I'm only going to, you can't blame them for becoming sectarian, because if you're Alawite and you're being slaughtered and you think, why isn't anyone stopping this? It's not fair to Sunnis, it's not fair to others, because they couldn't stop it. But if that's how somebody perceives it, I mean, how would you feel, right? So unfortunately, there is, from what I understand, that divide that wasn't there before. And because before, if you went to Syria and if you asked them what was really a taboo question, what is your faith? They'd say, Ana Suri, I'm Syrian. Most of the time, that was my experience. I would ask them in Arabic, and they'd say, I'm Syrian, or if they did talk about their faith, then they'd say like, well, we intermarry, we share each other's holidays, we're not sectarian. There's a small percentage who were Takfiri ideology, the flames of which were fanned from Qatar and Saudi Arabia. But now with all the horrors that have happened and continue to happen, that's why I say and without having the weapons and everything necessary, I would think it would be very difficult at this point. If Giuliani is ousted and the situation turns, maybe, but I don't think anyone has a crystal ball. I do think his days are numbered. I don't think he's meant to stay indefinitely, of course. He's a tool. But what comes next, I don't expect it would be anyone sympathetic to the Syrian population, or who would want to keep Syria as a whole entity. They want to divide Syria up. So that makes it even harder, because the sectarian divide is already in people's mind now.
Well, since you're in Moscow and the little time I have left with you, what is the temperature on the street with the people in Russia about deep strikes into Russian territory, especially with ATACMS and all of these other things? Because we know that to strike Russia with these things, they have to be NATO or U.S. personnel doing it. And why is Russia not striking outside of Ukraine to show more force towards them, because they're being attacked?
So Russia has been trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? First of all, it's been very restrained in its operation in Ukraine. We just look how America and Israel act around the world, what Israel's done to Gaza the last 2 years, and to Lebanon and to Syria over the years. What America did in Raqqa, for example, in Syria and in Iraq, just two examples. Russia hasn't been using that kind of force in the same manner. It's been a very targeted war against, for the most part, I'm not on the ground where the strikes are happening, but from what I understand by all reports, targeted against military targets and infrastructure as well that will impact the military and the government. People do say, why don't you strike more? But along with restraint, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Well, Russia, even before starting the SMO, Russia was giving Ukraine and NATO really a chance for this not to occur. They kept pushing for some sort of dialogue. Remember now, we heard last year, the year before, Merkel cackling about the fact they never intended to adhere to the Minsk Accords. So that was years and years and years of just falsity. And I know in 2019, when I went there, I was told, again, going to areas where Ukraine was striking civilians, that Ukraine was breaking the accords all the time. They were violating the terms all the time. So they never intended to adhere to it, and yet Russia's trying to find a diplomatic solution. So I believe also it doesn't want to provoke a very strong reaction from NATO by attacking further, by attacking outside of Ukraine. However, it has warned it will if these larger weapons are used, or if God forbid something nuclear is used. But it's trying to find a solution. So it's the U.S. side, it's the NATO side, European side. I'm sorry, also that continue to try to provoke Russia. I mean, Russia has shown when it announced its Arechnik system that had a very powerful. I'm trying to think of the appropriate term of what type of missile it is, but anyway, a missile that the West was not expecting. Now they've more recently announced that the next level missile, which is very powerful, and they've made it clear if you do use long-range weapons deep into Russia, we will respond. So it's not that I think we shouldn't frame it as why aren't they attacking NATO centers outside of Ukraine. I think they're being restrained, and it's the West who's being absolutely unhinged in its provocations of Russia. In terms of the public, people want harder strikes for sure. Before, when the SMO started, I don't know what percentage of people really understood what was going on in the Donbass. A certain number would, a certain number were very sympathetic. A certain others probably were just going about their lives, not that clued in. When Ukraine started the drone strikes into Moscow and region, so I was living in the southeast outside of Moscow, and we were getting drones all the time. And I remember going to the site of a drone strike, just a 25-minute walk from where I was living, and where a woman had been killed and a number of buildings had been hit. And I talked with civilians there. And one young woman was like, this is new to us. We don't know how to react, because in Donbass, when there's incoming, people know what to do. They go to the basement, they go into the doorways, whatever. They get off the streets, they know where to go. But this one was saying, I'm not experienced with this. I don't understand. So now the terror of unprovoked drones and bombings in areas outside of the Donbass and the border regions has reached civilians in the Moscow region and elsewhere, of course, not only Moscow, in the south, east of Moscow. And so the demand for stronger repercussions and strikes from Russia, as I understand it, has risen considerably. So there would be support from the population if Russia were to use stronger force. But again, Russia is trying to find a diplomatic solution.
Well, in the West, they only know one direction, and that's straight ahead. It doesn't matter if if the brick wall is up ahead or the cliff is up ahead. They're not going to put it in reverse. They're not going to back down. They're going to keep going. And I think Russia, the leadership misunderstands the Western leadership, because America is not just America, and Britain is not just Britain. These are hegemons that are fighting for not just Ukraine. They're fighting for survival of their rules-based order, and they feel as though that they're losing everything. And when a person loses everything, they lose rational and sound thinking. And I believe that Russia has to start looking at them. And I'm not advocating war, but if I'm talking to you and you're talking and you can't understand me, and I'm making every effort to understand you, but you still can't understand me or whatever, then what I have to do is learn the language that you understand the most, and I have to sometimes speak it to you so that we can bridge that gap of misunderstanding. And the reason I say that is because right now, with the collapse of the Western world and the Western economy and everything that they have, Russia has to speak a language that the United States knows. We see that the United States doesn't know diplomacy anymore. We see that they don't know how to keep their word anymore. We see that they're double dealing, on one hand talking about peace while sending special forces in and mercenaries in to kill Russians themselves. And because remember, there were Western mercenaries in Russia with Ukrainian forces when they were killing people in those towns. do you think there's going to come a time where Russia will have to speak a little bit of the language that the Western Empire understand, and that's the language of violence? If you slap me, I'm gonna have to slap you back, even if it risks war, because I believe that everybody continues to put the onus on the victim to be restrained instead of putting the onus on the aggressor. And I'm not advocating war, but I'm saying that if you're doing something over and over again and you're expecting the same result, that's pretty much insanity. And they continue to our Western partners, and every time they're backstabbed. Do you believe that there will come a point where the political situation in Russia becomes so strained where the people will demand a strike? To show the West that they too can be hit?
No, I get the feeling of frustration that at the what seems like a soft approach to the West and the diplomatic language. I mean, you again, as I said earlier, you have Trump calling President Putin all sorts of names and behaving like a temper tantruming child. And then you have him being met with diplomatic or Western partner speak. And so I get it's frustrating and confusing. Again, I'm not a politician. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't be saying that. I'd be swearing. I'd be very angry. But I'm not a politician. But when Russia is doing the juggling act of, I mean, if one other factor people don't consider is if Russia had gone all out and done an American style or an Israeli style campaign in Ukraine and just bomb the hell out of the country, like seriously, as it has the potential to do, what would the response have been? It would have been war. It would have been full-on war from NATO. So I know people. People were saying the same thing when, if you remember, when Avdiivka, to the west of Donetsk, was still occupied by Ukrainian forces. People were like, "Why don't you bomb the hell out of Avdiivka? Just level it." And the response was because there's civilians there. It was the same in Syria, by the way. People would say that. Why don't you just bomb the hell out of eastern Aleppo? Because there's still civilians there. And unlike Israel and America, there is a great degree of concern for civilians to the extent that a slower war is waged. So, by the way, Avdiivka was liberated, and so now that pushed the line back, and so there was a little bit of relief for Donetsk in terms of the hideous, horrendous shelling it was enduring. But I think that when we demand, okay, Russia, you just have to pound the hell out of Poland or wherever, it's unrealistic because, again, and I know other people are saying don't do that, but strike strategic military targets in these countries. It might come to that. I don't know. Again, it just depends on the nature of weapons that Ukraine NATO uses in Russia, how far into Russia they go, how intense they do this. There probably will be a very strong response, but I can't predict what that will be.
And the only reason I ask that is because the West, first they took out an early warning radar in Russia, and then after that they plotted for over a year. They put it all on the back of the Ukrainians, but we know that the operation that took place in Russia to try to take out Russia's strategic nuclear bombers and all of that was a Western ploy, and that was tantamount to an act of war. And I'm saying without a major response from that, these things will, and I'm not advocating going in pounding somebody. I'm saying a response for a response, because it seems like the more Russia, and I know Russia's playing the long game, but the more they allow this to go on, the more citizens and troops that they lose, and they also have an audience that they're playing to globally, because people are watching and saying, hey, these people struck your strategic nuclear assets. Why are you so calm about it? Do you think, I'm just trying, do you think that Russia will be forced, if they continue to do acts like that, to strike, let's say, a base in Romania or a base in Poland or whatever, because they've come close to it with drones on the border with Ukraine?
Yeah, I'm sorry for looking at my phone. I wanted to get the name of that latest missile system. I don't have it on the tip of my tongue. But it is, if I remember correctly, nuclear powered. It can stay in the air for a very, very long time. It's almost indetectable by air defense and other systems, and it can deal a very serious blow. I think that the fact that President Putin, when he met with the military there was a televised meeting some weeks, I think ago it was, and discussed that and was asking about the latest technical developments. I think that was a point being made, like a flexing of muscles without, at this point, hitting someone, but saying this is what we have the potential to do, so screw around and find out. I think that is their tactic, hoping if they flex with the type of muscles that they do have, they can really deal serious damage, but are trying not to. They're still aiming for this political deal. Deal's the wrong word. I hate that word now. Political resolution. But I mean, I think you're right. There will inevitably be a point where if the West keeps provoking and in a much more dangerous manner, there will be reciprocation. But we have to wait and see what that will be and when.
One of our viewers says the name of it is Brezhnev, the Brezhnev missile.
Brezhnev. That might, yeah.
So in closing, because I know you have things to do, so I'll give this last question. What is Russia's feeling on taking Odessa and Kiev? Because Kiev was part of Russia also. So what do you think that they will take those regions, or do you think that they will stop, or will they just take all of Ukraine? Because the West is going to use whatever is left over to set up missile bases there to threaten Russia's security.
I don't think they ever wanted to take all of Ukraine. I don't think that's realistic. Again, things can change. We'll see what happens, but that wasn't in their plans. Odessa is a possibility. The population is predominantly ethnic Russian speaking. And we know what happened back in 2014. Actually, that was Maidan. I'm sorry. Or was it? Give me a minute. Anyway, I think Odessa could be, well, they would say here liberated, but all of Ukraine, no. That would be a major headache for Russia. I mean, Western Ukraine is heavily propagandized with that ideology, the Banderite Nazi ideology. That will take a lot of reverse brainwashing, unbrainwashing for generations. Who knows how that will be done, but that's a very real thing there. And I highly doubt Russia would want to deal with a population that has that mentality. All the areas that have joined Russia are areas where they're ethnic Russians and they identify as Russians. So integrating them into Russia is not a problem. And it's not, as some have floated the idea that Russia and US have discussed, they might implement an Israeli West Bank scenario in these regions. It's bullshit. These regions are Russians. They voted to join Russia. But yeah, I think that we can't really know what. It just, again, depends on what NATO does, what Europe does. If they continue to push for further war, I think they're absolutely, I don't want to say they're insane. They're not insane. They know they can't win. They know Ukraine can't win, but they can profit like bandits from the military aspect, from arms dealing, from the military, from making money out of war. They can profit from that, but they know Ukraine won't win. So I guess the question is, how far are they willing to go? How crazy are they going to act? Not that they are crazy, but they're doing crazy stuff. Because if they did something very crazy, maybe then there would be a need to take all of Ukraine. But I just don't think that's in the plans, and I don't think that's the desire of the leadership here. But Odessa is a possibility.
What about Kiev?
I don't think so. I have no idea. No idea. I would say no, but why? Is somebody suggesting that to you?
Yes, because they were saying that was the original, one of the capitals of Russia at one time, a long time. I'm not sure, but some people were saying that they believe that Russia may take Kiev also.
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, Eva, thank you so much for joining us on the platform. First of all, thank you for giving me your time because you did not have to accept the invite. And I'm so thankful. I've been wanting to interview you for the longest. I follow your work, especially on RT, your articles that come out. I really appreciate the work that you do. And my audience appreciates the work that you do. And we want you to stay safe and stay blessed.
Oh, thank you. Where are you based, by the way?
I'm on the Gulf Coast of Florida. I'm
Okay.
Panhandle. I'm on the Panhandle.
Okay, well, you stay safe there with Trump. Not that I'm pro-Biden, believe me. I'm not pro-Trump or Biden. It's unfortunately, okay, I was born in the States, so I'm American. Unfortunately, Americans are stuck with a system that just doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So again, be safe. I hope that you and your family and your dogs are safe.
Yes, they finally calmed down, but sorry about that. They were literally nudging my elbow as dogs do.
And while you were talking about your dog, my cat was running across the floor. So I was looking out as you were talking. But thank you so much. And I'll send you a copy of the video. Thank you.
Okay.
So much.
Thanks very much for having me on and for your time.
All right. Thank you. Be blessed.
Thank you.
Everybody listen, later today we'll have Carl Czar on the platform at 6:30 p.m. time. Join us, please. It doesn't cost you anything. Hit the like button. Hit the like button. And if you've heard anything that inspires you or that you agree with or that you disagree with, please don't hesitate to subscribe. It doesn't hurt you to subscribe also because a lot of my subscribers are being unknowingly unsubscribed by a certain platform. Okay. And I'll just put it like that. So check your subscriptions. If you're not getting the notification, unsubscribe, then subscribe back and hit the bell icon. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me on this platform today. And as I say, I always say, do right by others, not because there's some material gain to be had or because there's some accolades behind it or some recognition. Do right by others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, God Almighty is watching you. And as my late, great, and wonderful mother would always say, God sits high on the throne of power, but he looks low. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody. Thank you all for joining me. We're out of here. Peace.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a